You always hear cash is king, but credit is queen. And who do we protect on the chessboard? We protect our credit.
I want to take my LLCs, start building that corporate credit. What is the next steps?
The way that you get around secured money is using unsecured money.
Nobody is told about this.
Credit doesn't necessarily mean debt. You're just using it to leverage.
Let's break down the difference between personal, business, and corporate.
You're using it as a tool to...
What do you suggest to people? Where do we find out and approach these banks?
The point of this process is to help a business owner be able to double their profits.
When the words Dun and Bradstreet come up, isn't this just a scam?
They're not a scam. What I will say, though, is...
Welcome to Beers with Contractors.
All right, Terry, there we go. It's been one of those days, sir, but we are at it. How are you doing?
Yes. Doing great. Doing good.
Well, I brought my beer season shirt today. So, by the way, how's the construction going on in the commercial property? Have you gotten mesothelioma yet?
No, I did not. I did get struck in the head by a falling piece of debris, which resulted in us taking new safety precautions in the building.
So is that the piece of plaster?
Yeah. Now I'm walking through the building, turning on lights, wiggle a cable, and then lo and behold, there was like a 1.5 pound, 2 pound piece of plaster supported by that cable that came crashing down on my head, and saw a few stars and went out and got my hard hat. And
I was going to say, you started following what you teach all your students to do at OSU. Like, hey, by the way, wear your hard hat. Hey,
No, it's like nothing's going to happen. No one's doing work above me. I'm the only person in the building. Mm-hmm. And somehow I almost knocked myself out. But so all's good. I hydrated afterwards to make sure no permanent damage was done.
Are you getting to the age where we need to get you one of those life alert necklaces? Like, help, I've fallen and I can't get up type necklaces?
No, it was good because when I was relaying this story to my wife, I think I saw actual concern and not just opportunity in her eyes. It's like that Powerball ticket just came that close. But no, it was a concern, and we both wore hard hats the rest of the day.
That's funny. Well, hey, I'm glad you're still with us, buddy. Glad we could have a beer together. Of course, for everybody out there, thank you for listening to another week of Beers with Contractors, because contractors obviously kick ass, Terry, and that's what we're all about here. So before we get going, be sure to like and subscribe. As the teenagers say, smash that bell. But also, I wanted to thank some of our new subscribers. We got Bear With Me listener, Koshala Serve Swearin', Soul 56, Super Fletcher Dog, Kevin Porter, and just Dave, a guy named Dave. So thanks for listening and subscribing. We appreciate you guys out there. So Terry, listen, our guest today, it's really important. I brought our guest here today because we need to talk about your credit, Terry.
Oh, no.
No, you've got good credit. But as you know, contractors out there have a tough time understanding and managing credit. So I'm super pumped to have our guest today. Our guest is also an advisor in the Women in Leadership program at University of Oklahoma. She is partnered with Blue Crest Financial Services. Also was a business operations manager for 18 years, 12 of which was in health and fitness. And bear with me, Terry. This is a long resume, but a good one.
Okay.
So was also a co-owner of a gaming and esports company, which she bootstrapped and then had to sell in 2020 due to some personal guarantees. And we all know what happened in 2020, unfortunately. Also now the director of business development at TD Corporate Credit, which is an umbrella that helps businesses with corporate credit, financial services, all sorts of cool things. So here to educate us Neanderthals, Terry, on corporate credit is Melissa Green. Hey, Melissa.
Hey,
good to have you on the show this week.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So, by the way, I've known you for a long time, and I could sit and hear you talk about just all of the ins and outs of corporate credit. And you've taught me so many things just in our short conversations. But before we get into that, let's go ahead and take a few steps back, because I know you just walked out of school one day and said, you know what, I'm going to get into corporate credit, right? So how the hell did we get here, Melissa? Where do we start?
Well, let's see. I operated businesses for about 18 years, and somewhere in that time period, I decided, I don't really want to work for corporate America anymore. And so that's one of the reasons that we got the gaming esports company going. And the whole goal with that was to have, a job outside of the corporate world and be able to retire from that. But then, COVID happened and that didn't work out so well. But
Yeah.
I found out about corporate credit about a year and a half, 2 years ago, I guess. And I was just amazed by it because when we had our business, we had business credit, which we'll get into the difference of these here in a second. But we had business credit that was personally guaranteed by me. And I knew there had to be a way to get corporate credit, which is the credit that, large corporations use, Wall Street uses, where they have access to capital that they don't have to personal guarantee. And I was constantly trying to figure out, how do you do it? How do you do it? How do you do it? And everybody kept telling me, oh, well, you're too small, which actually isn't true. Or that they just couldn't tell me how to do it. And so now I get to be the one that teaches everybody else how to do what I couldn't figure out at that time. And if I had had that at that time, one of two things would have happened. Either one, I would have had enough capital to keep the business going, or worst case scenario, if the business wasn't viable anymore, I would have been able to shut down that business and walk away and have absolutely no liability in it, which is amazing.
Yeah, so that's one thing that I think, and I help a lot of startups, is they start out in the world, they're like, oh, I need to go get a loan to start my business, right? And they don't think to even ask because they're just assuming, yeah, it's all either through the SBA or through my personal. But let's break out the crayons real quick, Melissa, and just break down the difference between personal, business, and corporate, because I think this is immensely important to all 7 of our listeners out there, because we're just not educated on what the difference is.
Yeah. Well, I should backtrack a little bit before I go into those and just kind of explain the reason why, because a lot of times when we say the word credit, people hear the word debt, or they think that that's the thing that we use when our business is failing and we can't get a loan. And that's really not the case. You always hear cash is king, cash is king. Well, it is, but credit is queen. And who do we protect on the chessboard? We protect our credit. And so if you're going to go and buy a house for yourself and for your family, we all know we had to have good personal credit, right? But on the business side, all those transactions that are happening on business credit don't get reported to the business credit bureaus, which is Dun & Bradstreet, Experian Business, and Equifax Business. So if nobody is reporting those transactions anywhere, how do you build a positive payment history? And if there's no positive payment history, how do you ever operate your business on your EIN? Because there's nothing there. You could be in business for years and never even have a corporate credit score. So how do you buy vehicles for your business? How do you get office space for your business? How do you get commercial real estate for your business on your EIN if there's no credit history? So that's where this kind of comes to be important. So there's actually 3 different types of credit in the United States, which kind of surprises most people. Most people only think there's 2, but there's 3. So you have personal credit, which you know all about how that works. Then you have business credit, which is essentially an extension of your personal credit. This is what 95% of business owners have. This is all the credit card applications that flood your mailbox. These are credit that is for your business, but is backed by your social security number. And the good thing about that is that it's easy to get. The downside to that is, let's say if I'm a roofer and I have all these business credit cards and I suddenly get an influx of customers because of a hailstorm or something like that. I had to go out there. I had to buy all these supplies to take care of all these customers that are coming all of a sudden. Well, what happens if I use more than 30% of that credit line? My credit score is going to go in the toilet because this is credit that's tied to my social security number. And so I have a story about this as well. I have a friend, and I won't list any names, but he...
Terry.
I was thinking it was you, Will.
he was
Sorry,
in
Terry, I had
training.
to throw that out there.
It wasn't
Yeah.
Terry.
Yeah, I'm not good enough to have that line of credit.
Go ahead, Melissa.
So we had all these hurricanes down in Florida recently, right? So he goes down there to take care of these trees that are with the hurricane situation down there. Well, he was using cash only, which a lot of people in trades do. But the problem is you had to pay for transportation. You had to pay for a place to stay. You had to pay for payroll, you had to rent all the equipment for everything that's going on, and we're talking about natural disaster as well, and so you're looking at a 60 to 120-day payout from the insurance companies.
Woo, man.
So that means you're taking everything off of your kitchen table in order to pay for this situation, which it almost bankrupted him. He had to let go of all of his employees, and we're starting small and starting from scratch because he didn't have anything to fall back on. If he had corporate credit, which is the third type of credit, which I'll explain a little bit further here in a second, but if he had corporate credit, he could have put everything on corporate credit, kept everything in his reserves, keep business going as normal, never had to let anybody go. And then as this insurance money starts coming in, now we're paying off these credit cards. And
Yeah.
the corporate credit, what's different about it from business credit is that it's credit that's for the business, but is backed by the EIN of the business, totally untethered from that business owner social security number. So if something like that happened, yeah, you could put your money on these corporate cards, but at the same time, it's untethered to your personal credit score. And so he would still be able to get a loan from the bank if he needed to.
So, Melissa, does the business have to have assets similar to what an individual would have to qualify for credits when it comes to the corporate side? Or how do you get into that and how do you build that?
This episode is sponsored by Performance, the bonus system designed to increase profits for your construction company. Performance incentivizes your production team for more efficient installs and rewards them when they beat your preset labor goals. So no more milking the clock and no more unnecessary gas station trips. Performance drives your team to work harder and smarter. Every construction company on Performance has seen a 7% decrease in direct labor costs or more. Click the link in the description or visit performance.co to schedule your demo today. That's PER4MANCE.co. Reward your team, retain your team, grow your profits. Performance.
So you have secured money and you have unsecured money. So secured money is what the bank's going to use. It's government regulated, government insured money. They had to make sure that they're going to get their money back because they're not really lending their money. They're lending all of our money. So they're always going to ask for a personal guarantee. And so the list of criteria for their underwriting for the loans are always going to be more extensive, which is where the collateral and all these things come into play. Now, the problem with that part is you're piercing the corporate veil, which we can talk about that here in a minute. But the way that you get around secured money is using unsecured money, which comes in the form of credit. And with that part of it, it's considered a no-doc program. So it depends on the cards that you're using as well, though. They all have different underwriting criteria, but they don't really ask for collateral in most cases. There might be a revenue requirement on some of them.
Yeah. So, Melissa, when I first met you last year, and you were taking me kind of through this understanding of corporate credit versus business credit, and of course, it was funny years ago. I still remember, like, well, here you got to fill out this personal financial statement because you're going to be tying up everything. And I was just naive. I just thought, oh, okay, that's what you do. But when I met you, I started going bank to bank to bank and saying, no, like you need to show me that this is tied to my EIN and corporate credit. And not a lot of banks, like, they either just kind of sweep this under the rug or they're not making it very clear of what the product is. So what do you suggest to people, even if they're dealing with small banks? Like, where do we find out and approach these banks in a way to say, hey, no, I'm looking for this specific product. Don't just give me whatever's off the shelf so you can sell me a loan. Obviously, I know you guys help with that at TD Corporate, but it's something that it just seems to be like nobody wants to talk about it at the banks.
Well, the banks are using secured money. So they're not really going to have a program that's EIN only. I think the only bank that I'm even aware of that will go without PG is Commerce Bank. At least the last time I checked, it may not still be the same. But there are heavy underwriting criteria behind that. Now, there's a process to where you can use credit where we can go through those 7 steps. But once you're at the top tier 4 credit, which we'll get into, that is where you can start pulling lines of credit and things like that, where it's totally untethered to your social security number. But it's a process. It's not like business credit where I can just fill out this application and all of a sudden you have corporate credit. It doesn't really work like that. So there's 7 steps to it. The first thing that needs to be done is what we call foundational or foundation items, but it's really just making sure the business looks fundable in the eyes of the lending institution. And so there are 150 things that most banks are going to use to check using LexisNexis. So you probably are aware of them. They're a data company. But there's 150 things that they look at to make sure that the business is credible before they go, we go further down into that process. So a few of those things that I usually like to mention to people just because they cost money is making sure that you have a website, that you have an email to the business domain, that you have a phone number that's registered to 411, which is absolutely nuts because I think the last time I used 411 was 95.
Don't worry,
And then,
Melissa. Our listeners range between the 30 and 50-year-old age demographic. So, that we know what 411 is, thank God. Hey, that's hysterical.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's in a lot of the underwriting criteria, which you wouldn't think because nobody uses it anymore. But you just register your business phone number to 411. You can still forward it to your regular cell phone. You don't need multiple phones to carry around.
Huh.
And then the last one is just make sure you have a website that matches the SIC codes and the NAICS codes on your business credit report. So say, for example, if your business credit report says that you're a trucking company, your website needs to be for a trucking company, or they're going to think you're a fraudulent
Gotcha.
business.
So, Melissa, my background and what I get into is real estate and renovations and stuff like that. Will does home service and
Other questionable things like having a podcast. And by the way, what I love about everything that Melissa's outlining, Terry, did you hear that it was 7 steps, not 12? So we can enter a 7-step program, and it sounds more efficient if you think about it.
well, as long as none of them really start with quitting, I think I'm gonna be.
Oh, yeah. So, sorry, Terry, go ahead with your question and froze you at the foul line, buddy.
Yeah, I know. I appreciate that, Will. I mean, so Melissa, my background is doing real estate, home investments, and commercial real estate. Will is doing home services and paying employees, buying material, putting material or inventory in place. Is there a type of customer that is the typical one that looks for corporate credit, like a type of business, type of customer, type of size that they would be saying, hey, I fit this criteria. I need to start looking at corporate credit as my next step to grow.
Well, I would say really that every business owner should be doing this regardless of the size, only because this is what truly separates you from your business. Because we all have that corporate veil that protects us from liabilities and lawsuits. And every single time we put our name, if it's on a line of credit through the bank, if it's a loan, if it's a business credit card that we're personally guaranteeing, every time we do that, we're piercing the corporate veil and you're just leaving yourself open for lawsuits and liabilities. So, in my opinion, every business should be doing it. Now, who works the best with us? Typically, business owners that have high overhead expenses and high potential liabilities are going to be the ones that really look for this typically. There's 10 industries, specifically construction, real estate, data technology, hospitality, medical, people who have high liabilities. I'll give you an example as to why. So let's say if you are a trucking company and I'm going to give you an example, an actual story. So guy, he has 120 semi trucks. Well, normally if you have a fleet of 120, you want to break those into groups of 10 so that if there's some kind of wreck on the highway, there's a lawsuit, you're only losing 10 semis, not 100. So he has 120 semis. One of the employees gets into an accident on the highway and kills a family. Huge lawsuit. Yes, they have insurance, but the insurance doesn't cover the entire thing. So when that happens, first thing they're going to do is they're going to come to that business for that difference, which in this case was $45 million. He loses all of his trucks because they're not separated into groups of 10. So no way to make money at this point. And because these are all personally guaranteed vehicles, guess who's liable?
Yeah.
So if this was all separated into groups of 10, we had build credit on each of those 10, he would have had purchase power times 12. And he never would have personally guaranteed any of these vehicles. They'd be in the business name only. So instead of him being liable for $45 million, he could just shut down the business.
So it's
Man.
similar to in real estate, we'll break up holdings into LLCs to mitigate the liability. Would each one of the LLCs associated with the certain properties need to have its own corporate credit line or back history?
Yeah. So normally what we recommend there is to have a holding company. You set up each of your properties as a series, and then each property has its own LLC. You're building corporate credit on each property, and then you're double, triple, quadrupling your purchase power. They can all lend to each other, and you can pull that money to buy new properties. And the odd thing about corporate credit is that corporate credit is actually built based on a proof ability to borrow and pay and getting that to reflect on the business credit bureaus. It's not based on revenue like most people think. So a lot of times people will say, "Oh, I'm too small. I can't do that program," or "I've only been open for a year." It doesn't matter. What matters is getting those transactions that are occurring in your business to reflect on the bureau.
Hmm.
So credit doesn't necessarily mean debt. You're just using it to leverage.
So, Melissa, and sorry, this just hit my brain. So, I know in personal credit, there's this concept of piggybacking, right? Where you can, essentially be attached to someone's long, lengthy credit history, for 30 to 60 days, and poof, it shoots through the roof. And then, of course, you can remove your name from that credit history. Does the same crossover in corporate and business credit, or is it still got to be built from the ground up through the 7 steps?
It has to be built up from the ground up. Now you can
Okay.
increase your purchase power like that because they can all lend to each other.
Uh-huh.
But as far as how you set it up, they all have to go through that 7-step process.
Melissa, let's say I'm ready to move forward, right? I want to take my LLCs, start building that corporate credit. What is the next steps that I go through?
Well, we operate on a membership-based program, and then the analyst would connect with you to start on the 7 steps. And as far as what those 7 steps look like, the first step, like I said, is checking the foundational items, making sure that your business looks fundable in the eyes of the lending institution. The second step is to make sure that you register correctly with all 3 of the business credit bureaus. I've never seen a business that's completely perfect in those 2 categories. There's almost something that's wrong. It has to look exactly the same all the way across the board between all 3 of the business credit bureaus, the Secretary of State, and the IRS. So let's say if your business, if you spell it out on one of them and it says STE, and then on another one you spell it out as sweet for your address, it's going to kick it back because it doesn't look exactly the same. So it's just a lot of cleanup in those first 2 steps. There's 4 tiers of credit. And what we've actually done is, I think I mentioned that only 5% of vendors, lenders, creditors, financial institutions report your positive payment history to the business credit bureaus. We take that whole 5% of businesses that do report, we have them in one platform. So technically we're a software as a service company, but all those 5% are in there. You have all of their underwriting criteria, so you know whether you're going to be approved or not before you ever apply for it. You know which of the business credit bureaus they're reporting to so that you can build all 3 profiles at the same time. Because let's say if you're going to go buy a truck and they pull Experian Business, but you've only been working on Dun& Bradstreet, you're going to get denied because you haven't built up all 3, if that makes sense. So we want to build up all 3 at the same time. And when you're in each tier, you essentially pick 2 to 3 different accounts that make sense for your business. So say, for example, you work in trades, I wouldn't give you a Brex card that's usually used for restaurants, right? I'd probably give you a fuel card or something like that. So you're picking 2 to 3. We wait 45, 60 days, make sure that they're reporting to the Business Credit Bureau. And then if they are, which we're going to make sure that they do, then once we're in tier 2, we pick another 2 to 3 different accounts, and it's basically just rinse, cycle, repeat until you're up into tier 4. When you're in tier 4 with a credit score of 80 or higher, that's where you can start doing everything on your EIN, from accounts receivable financing, real estate, vehicle financing, where you can operate entirely on your EIN.
Nice. Yeah, and it's funny when I heard 80, Terry, it's like, so you're telling me there's a chance. Yeah. It's like, wait a minute, 80? Like, that's a passing grade.
Yeah. You know what? That's funny because anytime anybody says they have business credit, I say, okay, what's your credit score? And they almost always say, "Oh, it's 720, it's 740." Like, that's a business credit score. That's not a corporate score. They're not.
Oh, so that's a good pre-qualifier out there. Like how to tell if who I'm speaking to is full of shit is what Melissa just said.
So from here on out, we'll just go with 80. Like
It's
if
No,
someone asks
no. From here on out, if somebody
80.
asks me what my corporate credit score is, I'm gonna be like F or the
I can pull
letter
it up right
T.
now.
It'll
I'll
be
tell
like
you.
Sesame Street. Like I'll just give them a letter.
Wait,
Yeah.
Melissa, you said you can pull Will's credit history. You can look into that for me?
Can do it right now if you want.
Yep.
Oh,
Going
this
down
could
the
be
rabbit
fun.
hole. Well, it's funny. Like Melissa told me about this, and so just out of curiosity, we started digging around. And sure as hell, like we had a lease for our Arkansas business that was not to our business. They misspelled the name on the lease, which was, flagging on reporting and just weird little things like that. And it's like, oh, no, it needs to be to this. They were actually invoicing, and the lease was under a business that didn't exist because of the way they spelled it. But it's just so crazy how that goes. And Melissa, you did bring up something very interesting because I talk to business owners around the country, and when the words Dun and Bradstreet come up, the first thing is like, wait a minute, isn't this just a scam? So, like, can you just refresh this whole topic? Because it's really important in this kind of, spectrum of credit.
Yeah, so there's 3 business credit bureaus that are totally separate from your personal. Dun& Bradstreet's the oldest one. That's the one everybody knows. So you also hear it called a Dunn's number. So you have
Mhm.
Dun& Bradstreet, you have Experian Business, and you have Equifax Business. So sometimes people will look at it as a scam because usually as soon as you start a business, Dun& Bradstreet's going to start calling you to help you build your credit. They're not a scam. What I will say though is the downside of trying to only go through Dun& Bradstreet or only going through Experian is that you're only building the credit profile for that one bureau.
Yeah.
So you really need to be able to do it on all 3. And it is kind of expensive, in my opinion, but you do have to have a solid DUNS number in order to get bonded. Usually they're looking at a score of 80 plus, which is equivalent to 720 on your personal credit score, just for comparisons. But yeah, they're necessary. You still got to have a good credit score on them as well.
So, Melissa, I want to paint a picture of a customer. And this business has a podcast where they have people on and they consume copious amounts of alcohol above the monies that are brought in. So, is there a chance for this podcast to develop corporate credit with our negative cash flow?
Yes.
There we go, Terry.
As long as
Let's
you have an
go.
EIN. What a lot of businesses will do that are startups because they have 0 revenue, which would be this situation.
Yep, and that's where I was leading into startups specifically because we meet customers or companies all over individuals all over the country. They're like, "Hey, I want to start a business," and it's like, "Well, you got to go to the loan and get a bank. You got to write a business plan. You got to do a pro forma and things like that." And nobody is told about this. Like, "Hey, this is what you need to do too." So that's my segue. Thank you for picking up on it, Melissa. So yeah, the startup. Where do they go?
Yeah,
So
she's smarter than you, Will.
I know.
for a startup, you can still go through the same 7 steps, but you use, because it's based on your proof ability to borrow and pay, not on revenue, you can use your own personal expenses. So let's say when
Oh.
you go get gas, when you get groceries, your bills, anything that you can put on credit, you can. The thing is, though, to make sure that it's legal, you can't claim any of those transactions on your business taxes as a tax write-off. And you had to make sure that you're going to pay those accounts or, those transactions off out of your personal bank account, not out of your business bank account. But as long as you keep those things separate, they don't really care what you're spending money on as long as you're paying it off and that you're not.
Did you hear that, Terry? Hey, so hold on. So most people, sorry, I'm segueing a little bit and I'm totally off script here, Melissa. But this is why I love our conversations. So if we're, and a lot of people do this, they spend their personal money on the business to get it going and they don't earmark it. But then there are some that put it as loan from shareholder on their balance sheets. So if they're doing that, does that negatively impact that ability to expand on that credit later? Or is it just being more earmarked? Okay. Huh.
No, Now, if you could find a way to get the payments for those loans to reflect on the bureau, that would be better as well, because
Uh,
the more you're spending, the more that you're proving that you can borrow and pay on the bureau, the higher that credit recommendation is going to be, which is what your purchase power actually is. And so, what you can do, there are some programs where it might not be something where you're swiping a card for, but you could self-report some of those invoices and still get them to reflect, which would be kind of to your point, a loan payment or something like that.
interesting.
Yeah, Melissa, like one position I look at is there's so much information out there talking about, don't borrow, don't take loans out, pay with cash if you can, that concept of not having debt associated with it. How do you see businesses that are operating in that mentality? How do you convince them that this is the next step that they need to take?
Well, going back to what I said earlier, cash is king, but credit is queen. And who do you protect on the chessboard? Credit doesn't have to mean debt. You're using it as a tool to build that purchase power and protect your own personal assets and the assets of the business. So anything that you can use credit for in the business, say things that you're already spending money on every month anyway. You're not creating debt. You're going to be spending this money anyway. And you pay it off at the end of the month so that you don't have to pay those interest charges, which usually corporate credit is lower interest, but you wouldn't have the interest charges and you don't have any debt. You still don't have any debt. You're just getting those things to reflect on the bureau so that when something happens, like my friend that went down to Florida, then you have something that you can fall back on and rely on without having to personally guarantee loans and things that could potentially destroy your corporate veil.
Yeah. Well, Melissa, I love nitpicking little cool ideas that other people have done. So, what are maybe the top two most creative things that you've seen businesses do once they've reached that top tier, leveraging and using this credit? Because I know we've talked about, heck, valuations and improving for, selling of the business, all sorts of cool things. But what's the top two you've seen?
Well, one of them you just brought up, which is increasing the value of the business, because the higher your credit recommendation is, it's actually considered an asset. So it increases the value of your business. And the other cool thing about it is, let's say this is big for trades. If you decide, hey, I really want to sell this business, but I don't have really any buyers except for my key man really wants to buy this from me. Maybe they're having a hard time getting a loan. Let's say if you do your business valuation through us, you know exactly what it's worth, right? And you build your corporate credit up to be high enough to cover the cost of what you want to sell the business for. So let's pretend it's $50,000. At least your credit recommendation is $50,000. You can sell the business as a stock sale, including that EIN, to your key man for $1. Once he takes over the business, he has access to those credit lines, can pull lines of cash to pay you back, and you walk away. And that way, you get exactly what you wanted it for. You have somebody who wanted to buy it from you, and they're able to get access to that capital within sometimes 72 hours or less.
Holy smokes. That is nuts. Because there's so many baby boomers that are aging out of their businesses and they want to leave it to family or friends or kids or whatever that have no assets to be able to purchase a multi, call it 7-figure business or whatever the case is. So with that situation of leveraging corporate credit to loan out to keep people working an ESOP, Melissa?
You do it as a stock sale.
Simple question. And she just answered that. And I guess I wasn't paying attention enough to look at that, Terry. Terry's like,
Simple
Hey,
question from a
dumbass,
simple
you are
man.
paying attention.
I would say, even if you didn't have a key man you wanted to sell it to, it does make your business look better in the eyes of a buyer. Because let's say if here's a plumbing company with no credit built on it. Here's another plumbing company, same size, same type of customer, same area, same everything, except they have credit recommendation on it. If I'm the buyer, I'm going to buy with the one with the credit recommendation on it because that means I have starting capital from the very get the time that I buy the business.
Yep. Yeah. There's already there's a fuel in the engine ready to go.
Yeah, and it's really you're taking that next step and you're playing at that next level is what it sounds like. You're moving from that like mom and pop hamstring it month to month to putting some more thought, effort, and background into it so that you can really take that next level.
Well, Melissa, you started kind of down this journey into the corporate credit world, but now like you're getting into all sorts of financial offerings to people. It's not just corporate credit stuff. So I kind of almost view it as the financial health suite of products for a business owner. So I know we've spent tons of time today just talking about corporate credit, but what are some of the other areas that people should know about and what you're focusing on and all of that?
Well, one of the most important ones is we are partnered with another payroll and PEO company. And the cool thing about this is any business that has over 15 employees, even if they're contracted employees, really should be using the help of payroll company one. But
Mhm.
also, this is the only payroll company in the entire country that will report your payroll dollars to the business credit bureaus. And so for most businesses, I would say about a third to a half of their overhead expenses comes from payroll. If you can get those to report, you're doubling their purchase power. So
Huh.
that is absolutely huge. The PEO service is going to be more, your HR type things. But as far as through the payroll side of it, we can get W-2s and 1099s reporting, which is huge for trades. Most of them work in 1099s. So that would
Mhm.
be one portion of the business. We also have a private commercial lending brokerage kind of attached to this as well. So people who can't get traditional loans, we may have some alternative ways for them to get access to capital. And the other one, this is brand new for us, but it's called Profit Accelerator. This is our business advisory side of the business. And it's really pretty cool. We can do it between 12 to 40 different KPIs where we're just taking a deep dive into what's going on in the business. And this isn't just like, here's some KPIs, here's some goals, here's a piece of paper, go figure it out, good luck. This is really more, how do we help with your overhead expenses? How do we help you with your cost of goods sold? Really, the point of this process is to help a business owner be able to double their profits and triple their revenue within 12 months without spending any extra dollars in marketing.
Wow, that's nuts. I mean, when you told me this several weeks ago that you were kind of expanding into all these other, not really niche, but kind of all hands on deck financial support, that's why I was like, Melissa, we got to get you on the podcast. We got to,
Well,
yeah.
I decided I wanted to be that person that I needed. So adding lots of tools to the toolbox so I can help in multiple areas. So
Well, Melissa, before we get to our big final question, which we ask all of our guests, because I already know a little bit about your story, I think it's really important to know, like, okay, we kind of went through the startup company, right? Now we've also gotten into the back end, the succession planning to where it can help on the back end of selling a business. So now let's go through a growth stage business that has to go through major capex. So where are you seeing the most use of this? Is it short-term loans, long-term loans? Is it revolving credit? Is it mezzanine loans? I mean, there's so many damn loans out there. Like the companies that are saying, "Hey, we're going to grow 80% next year." Where are you finding the most value for those companies?
it's kind of all those things, and it just depends on the situation in each business. But usually
Mm.
where people are needing it the most as far as like growth and expansion wise is somewhere around year 2, year 5, and year 10. And
Mm.
especially if they've been bootstrapping or if they've been using business credit that's personally guaranteed, because if you start growing too fast, you could bankrupt yourself real fast. And so it's just good to have alternatives in your back pocket.
Yeah. Well, cool. Well, Terry, I've been training you for this moment, so I think we're almost there. Are you ready to ask the final question that we ask all of our guests on the show?
The real question is, how many beers have you been having, Will? Because I asked this question last week, and I think I botched it then.
I'm still in single digits. I mean, it was a rough day, Terry. Like, don't
Oh,
judge me, man. The
Will, our
listen,
relationship is built on nothing but judgment, and it works just fine for us.
it does work. Oddly enough, you know what's funny about all this is I'm going to start building corporate credit in the podcast, so then I can fund our therapist, where me and you can go in and talk to like a relationship therapist. But little do they know they're actually going to be a guest on the show. and they don't realize it. So that'll be our next spin-off project.
You know what would be great is T-shirts that have the odd couple, and I'm sure there's like trademarks that we can't get into right there, but me and you as the odd couple, that would be appropriate.
I mean, Odd Couple or Step Brothers. I mean,
either one.
We could pull that off. So
Well, let's see if I can screw this up. Well, Melissa, we like to end the podcast every time with talking about one of our largest screw ups that we can actually look back and see some value in. So, is there a time that in business that you screwed up so badly that you can now say, I'm proud of that?
Well, Will kind of already knows this already, but the company that I personally guaranteed the whole thing. I just thought that was just the cost of doing business, right? That you sign your name on all the things. And so I signed my name on the lease. I didn't have to do that if I had a good solid DUNS number. And if I had good credit on the business, didn't have to do that. All the equipment that we had was all personally guaranteed by me on business credit cards. We had investors lined up for a second and third location. We were talking about possibly building on Walmart's parking lot. Like, there's lots of good things going on. But then as soon as COVID hits, the door shut, nobody's coming in. Even if the doors are open, nobody's touching controllers and keyboards and things because they're all afraid they're going to get sick. And so what do? If I had corporate credit then, could have just walked away. I was lucky enough to be able to sell my shares of it and walk away from it, but most people during that time period were not that lucky. So that whole experience, though, even though it was the worst experience of my life, I would not be doing what I'm doing now and be able to help all the people I'm helping now if that had not happened. So that was the time I fell in my face.
I mean, you took a negative and turned it into a positive in my mind. Then, I mean,
yeah, and I know that had to suck, Melissa, because it's like, yeah, I'm so glad that you screwed your credit up back in 2020 because now we wouldn't have the Melissa saving everybody all these hundreds of thousands of dollars. But I know that's painful.
yeah.
But
Thank
also,
you for your pain,
It was
Melissa.
Yeah,
$750,000
you
of
did
$1 million if we want to be specific.
Oh, that sounds brutal. It is funny that you mention it because I think we look at COVID as this unique circumstance that it was like a big rubber stamp on that time frame. But the fact is it's happening now. We've got cyber attacks going on. We've had hurricanes wipe out businesses. Heck, there's a well drilling company that's been in business over 50 years in my hometown in North Carolina. The Hurricane Helene wiped them out, and they just said, we're shutting the doors, right? Like, we were done. And so we think COVID is unique, but these situations are constantly happening in all sorts of weird variations. But Melissa, I appreciate you spending time with us two cavemen today and our great 7 listeners out there on Beers with Contractors. So if somebody wants to get a hold of you, and I encourage that they do, just ask questions. How do they reach you?
So anybody could call me at my business line. It's 405-254-7287. My email is mgreen@tjcorporatecredit.com, or my website is mgreen.tjcorpcredit.com.
Well, thanks for that. And I also know you're active on LinkedIn too, because I see your posts there. So that's
Yes,
perfect
I
that
am
you
all
got
over
you.
LinkedIn under Melissa Green.
So, Terry, now we have copious amounts of notes on how we can expand our beer drinking enterprise. We are going to take this world over 12 ounces at a time, sir.
Yeah, like half the questions I asked were for me personally. I mean,
I know.
this is all good information.
Well, no, like, man, you're going to use it because you're pretty much taking over your small town on the commercial real estate side. So it's like, yeah, you should be using this stuff. So, Melissa, you are a good friend and a great friend to the industry. I appreciate you, Terry. I know we gave each other a lot of jabs today, but appreciate you, buddy, and appreciate all you listeners out there. Thanks for listening to us babble on for another good 45 to 50 minutes on another episode of Beers with Contractors. We will see you guys next week, and remember, contractors kick ass. See you guys.
See ya.
And that's a wrap for today's episode of Beers with Contractors. We hope you enjoyed our chat as much as we did. Before we say our final goodbyes, a friendly reminder. Beers with Contractors encourages responsible drinking. If you choose to enjoy a beverage during our time together, please do so in moderation and only if you're of legal drinking age in your country or state. Furthermore, the advice and insights shared in this podcast are for informational purposes only. Always consult with professionals and experts in your field, and be sure to follow local laws and regulations regarding licensing and permits. We're here to help, entertain, and inspire, but your safety and compliance are important. So, as you head out into the world of construction and contracting, remember to build responsibly and make decisions that stand the test of time. Thanks for joining us today. We'll catch you on the next episode of Beers with Contractors. Until then, cheers to your success.